The heavy oak doors of the Harvard Club didn't just open, they loomed. I stepped inside, adjusting the collar of my modest navy suit, ready to celebrate my son's engagement. But before I could take 2 steps toward the ballroom, a frantic floor manager shoved a stark white apron into my chest. "Late again," he hissed, checking his watch. "Kitchen is through the left. Tray service starts in 5 minutes." My hand hovered over the federal judge credentials in my purse. I was about to correct him to clarify that I wasn't late help but the mother of the groom. That's when I heard a voice boom from the coat check, a voice I recognized instantly. "Sterling Thorne." "It's about standards, Madison," he was saying loud enough for half the lobby to hear. "If Ethan's mother shows up looking like she just scrubbed floors, keep her away from the partners. We can't have the cleaning lady chatting up the Supreme Court justices." I froze. I didn't pull out my badge. I didn't clear my throat. I just looked at the apron in my hands, and then at the man who thought my dignity was determined by his tax bracket. I smiled, cold, small. "Right away, sir," I whispered to the manager, and I tied the apron strings tight. "Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I read every single one, and I'd love to know who is part of our community. In my courtroom, silence is a weapon. You let a defendant talk long enough, comfortable enough, and they will always, without fail, hang themselves. I decided to apply the same jurisprudence here. I didn't cry. I didn't feel humiliated. I felt the cold, sharp clarity of a predator entering high grass. This wasn't a reception anymore. It was an undercover operation. I walked into the ballroom not as Judge Lydia Vance's youngest appointment to the Second Circuit, but as a ghost in a white apron. The transformation was instantaneous. It is a psychological phenomenon I have studied for years, the gray rock method. By making myself uninteresting, flat, and subservient, I became invisible. The elite of New York didn't see a person. They saw a prop, a furniture piece that served champagne. And because I was furniture, they felt safe. I moved through the crowd tray, balanced on one hand. The air smelled of expensive perfume and old money arrogance. Across the room, I locked eyes with my son Ethan. He was standing next to the champagne tower, looking handsome but anxious in his tuxedo. His eyes widened when he saw me. He took a step forward, his mouth opening to shout, "Mom!" I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I gave him the look. It is the same look I give a bailiff when a defendant is about to have an outburst, a microscopic shake of the head, a narrowing of the eyes that says, "Stand down, let this happen." Ethan knew that look. He had grown up with it. He hesitated, then closed his mouth, stepping back into the shadow of a pillar. Good boy. He realized perhaps for the first time that his mother wasn't just a parent, she was a strategist. I circled the perimeter, moving closer to the Thorne family. Sterling Thorne was holding court near the orchestra, a glass of scotch in one hand, gesturing wildly. He was comfortable. He felt like the king of the jungle here. He didn't know that the jungle has eyes. I watched his daughter Madison, my son's fiancée. She was wearing a dress that likely cost more than my first car, something made of silk and diamonds. But she didn't wear it with grace. She wore it like armor. I watched her snap her fingers at a busboy to take her empty glass, not even breaking eye contact with her conversation. No thank you. No acknowledgement of his existence. "They are so lucky we're even considering this merger," Sterling laughed, his voice carrying over the music. "Ethan is a bright kid, sure. But let's be honest. He's marrying up. Way up. We're doing a charity case here." I felt a flash of heat in my chest, but I poured it into a mental folder labeled Evidence. This was the discovery phase. And unlike in my courtroom, the opposing counsel didn't know the trial had already started. I drifted closer, refilling a glass near his elbow. "More scotch, sir?" I asked, keeping my voice flat, stripping it of all my education, all my authority. Sterling didn't even look at my face. He waved a dismissive hand at me like I was a fly. "Keep it coming. And try not to spill it on the Italian leather." "Of course, sir," I murmured. I walked away, the adrenaline settling into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. They thought I was serving them drinks. In reality, I was serving them a rope, and I was going to let them use as much of it as they wanted. The double doors swung shut behind me, cutting off the swell of the orchestra and the sharp laughter of the Thorne family. The sudden silence of the service corridor was jarring. It smelled of industrial strength, dishwasher fluid, and burnt coffee. To most people, this hallway was a place to hide. But as I leaned against the cold tile wall, taking a breath, I didn't feel hidden. I felt grounded. I looked down at my hands. They were manicured now, soft from years of lotion and climate-controlled chambers. But the phantom ache in my knuckles was still there. 30 years ago, I didn't wear a federal judge's robe. I wore a gray jumpsuit. I worked the night shift at the Bronx Supreme Court, pushing a mop bucket across the marble floors I would one day rule over. I remembered the specific sound my textbooks made when I propped them open on a wet floor sign, stealing 5 minutes of study time between emptying trash bins. I learned the law by cleaning up after the people who practiced it. Sterling Thorne looked at a server and saw a failure of ambition. I looked at a server and saw the hunger that built empires. That was why I didn't tear off the apron in the lobby. That was why I didn't scream. Because wearing this uniform didn't lower my status. It reminded me of my source code. I closed my eyes, running the numbers in my head. A habit I never broke. Ethan didn't know the full extent of the ledger. He didn't know that when his father left, I liquidated my small retirement fund to keep us in the good school district. He didn't know that his semester abroad in London cost me 3 years of vacations I never took. I had been the silent investor in his life, pouring equity into his character, compounding interest on his integrity. The Thornes, they were late-stage investors. They showed up when the stock was already high, trying to acquire a controlling interest in a company they didn't build. I thought about the check Sterling bragged about writing for the wedding venue. $50,000. He thought that gave him the right to treat my son like a lucky charity case, and me like the help. He was mistaken. I wasn't just a mother protecting her cub. I was a majority shareholder protecting her asset. And I was beginning to suspect that this merger was toxic. A young busboy brushed past me, carrying a tray of dirty glasses, his eyes on the floor. "Excuse me," he mumbled. "Chin up," I said, my voice dropping automatically into the tone I used for junior clerks. "You're the only reason this party is happening. Never apologize for working." He looked up, startled, then nodded. I straightened the apron strings. The nostalgia was over. The justification phase was complete. I knew exactly who I was, and I knew exactly what my son was walking into. It was time to go back into the lion's den. I pushed the doors open, letting the noise of the party wash over me again. I wasn't just serving drinks anymore. I was collecting receipts. The ballroom was louder now, the alcohol having stripped away the first layer of social varnish. I moved back into orbit, a satellite tracking the gravitational pull of the Thorne family ego. I found them near the floor-to-ceiling windows posing for photos. Madison was the center of gravity, radiating a blinding, brittle kind of charisma. She was flanked by her bridesmaids girls, who looked less like friends and more like accessories chosen for their ability to not outshine the bride. I watched Sophia, the young server I'd seen earlier, approach the circle. She was holding a silver tray of crab cakes, her hands trembling slightly. She waited for a break in the conversation, polite, deferential. "Hors d'oeuvre, Miss Thorne," Sophia asked softly. Madison spun around her face, twisting in a flash of irritation that was so fast, so ugly, it was almost impressive. "God, no," Madison snapped, recoiling as if Sophia had offered her a petri dish of bacteria. "I specifically told the coordinator no shellfish near the bridal party. Are you trying to kill me, or are you just incompetent?" The music seemed to stop in my ears. Sophia paled her grip on the tray, slipping. "I'm so sorry, I didn't know." "Clearly you don't know much," Madison cut her off, her voice carrying that sharp nasal edge of practiced disdain. "Go away. Before you ruin the dress." Sophia turned to leave, her eyes welling up, but in her haste, she bumped the edge of a high-top table. A single flute of champagne wobbled and tipped, splashing a few drops onto the marble floor, nowhere near Madison's precious gown. But you would have thought a bomb had gone off. "Unbelievable, Sterling," Thorne roared, stepping in. He didn't check to see if the girl was okay. He didn't offer a napkin. He laughed, a cruel barking sound. "You see this, Ethan. This is why we pay for the VIP package. To avoid the riffraff. Good help isn't just hard to find, it's extinct." Ethan looked sick. He started to step forward to say something, but Madison put a hand on his chest, claiming him, silencing him. That was the moment. I stepped forward. I didn't look at Sterling. I didn't look at Madison. I knelt down on the cold marble floor next to Sophia. "It's just water and grapes, honey," I whispered, pulling a cloth from my apron. "It wipes right up." Sophia looked at me terrified. "I'm going to get fired." "You won't," I said, my voice steel wrapped in velvet. "I promise." As I wiped the floor, I looked up. From my vantage point on my knees, the angle was perfect. I saw Madison Thorne towering above me, sneering, sipping her drink. She thought she was the queen of this castle because she was standing and I was kneeling. She didn't understand the oldest law of power. Noblesse oblige. True nobility serves. It protects. It lifts up. The weak, the truly weak, are the ones who need to step on others to feel tall. I looked at her $8,000 dress and saw a cheap costume. I looked at Sterling's Italian loafers and saw a man with no soul. I stood up holding the dirty cloth. I caught Madison's eye. For a second, just a second, she looked unsettled. Maybe she saw something in my face that didn't belong on a server. Maybe she saw the judge. "All clean, miss," I said, my voice devoid of warmth. "About time," she huffed, turning her back on me. I walked away, but I wasn't gathering evidence anymore. The trial was over. The verdict on her character was guilty. Now I was just waiting for the sentencing phase, and I needed to make sure the punishment fit the crime. I traded the tray of crab cakes for a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon and moved toward the corner table. This was the inner sanctum. The air here was thinner, colder. It was where the partners stood in a tight phalanx of black tuxedos, their backs turned to the rest of the party. They weren't discussing the wedding. They were discussing the kill. As I approached, Sterling Thorne was leaning in, his voice dropped to a conspiratorial purr that carried the weight of pure arrogance. "The Meridian antitrust merger is a done deal, gentlemen," Sterling said, swirling his scotch. $40 billion. The biggest payout this firm has seen in a decade. I poured champagne into the glass of the man next to him, a senior partner I recognized from his bio on the firm's website. He looked nervous. "I don't know, Sterling," the partner said. "The Department of Justice is breathing down our necks, and the case just got assigned to Judge Vance in the Second Circuit. I've heard she's meticulous." My hand didn't shake. I filled the glass to the perfect rim, not spilling a drop. I waited. Sterling laughed, a sound like dry leaves crunched under a boot. "Vance, Lydia. Vance, please. She's a diversity hire with a bleeding heart. She spent her early career in family court. She cares about feelings, not fiscal quarters." I stepped back into the shadows, clutching the cold bottle against my apron. Exhibit A. Underestimation of opposing counsel. "But the environmental impact," reports the partner pressed. "If Vance sees the toxicity levels in the water table data, she'll block the merger. It's a violation of the Clean Water Act." Sterling took a long, slow sip of his drink. "She won't see them." The circle went quiet. "We're not going to shred them, are we?" someone whispered. "We're not amateurs," Sterling scoffed. "We're going to bury them." We dumped the toxicity reports in the middle of the discovery handover. Box 4000 right between the cafeteria receipts and the parking validation logs. She's a federal judge with a backed-up docket. She doesn't have the time, and she certainly doesn't have the brainpower to dig through 2 million pages of discovery to find the one chart that matters. I felt a cold thrill race down my spine. It was a sensation I usually only felt when a jury foreman stood up to read a verdict. He had just admitted to spoliation of evidence. He had just admitted to a conspiracy to defraud the court, and he had done it in front of the very judge he planned to deceive. "We steamroll her," Sterling concluded, raising his glass. "We walk in there, we use big words, we bury the bodies, and we walk out with $40 billion. To the Meridian merger." "To Meridian," the men chorused. I adjusted the towel over my arm. In my head, I wasn't serving drinks anymore. I was drafting a bench warrant. "More champagne, gentlemen?" I asked, my voice invisible. "Keep it coming, sweetheart," Sterling said, turning his back to me again. I walked away, the bottle heavy in my hand. He thought he was burying the evidence. He didn't realize he was burying himself. The merger was the main course, but Sterling wasn't done feasting. He was drunk on power now, the kind of intoxication that makes men careless. He draped an arm around the senior partner's shoulder, shifting the topic from federal crimes to family triumphs. "And it's not just the firm winning today," Sterling beamed, gesturing toward his daughter across the room. "Madison just secured the summer associate position at the Solicitor General's office. The D.C. internship." The partner raised an eyebrow. "Impressive. That program accepts, 3 applicants a year. It's usually reserved for the top 1% of the Ivy League." I froze. I knew that program. I sat on the oversight committee. The selection process was blind, rigorous, and based entirely on merit. Madison Thorne, who I had just watched abuse a server for a mistake she didn't make, did not have the temperament or the transcript for that seat. Sterling chuckled, a low, oily sound. Let's just say the selection committee suddenly remembered how much they enjoy the new reading room I funded. They had to make some administrative adjustments. Adjustments, the partner asked. There was some girl. Sterling waved his hand dismissively. Some nobody from a state school. Perfect LSAT score apparently. A real striver. But she doesn't have the pedigree. We couldn't let a slot like that go to waste on someone who doesn't have the connections to use it, so her application got misplaced. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just nepotism, it was theft. I looked over my shoulder toward the service entrance. Sophia was sitting on a milk crate during her 5-minute break. She had a thick book open on her lap. I squinted. It was an LSAT prep guide. The pages were dog-eared, the margins filled with notes in cheap blue ink. The pieces clicked together with the terrifying precision of a closing argument. Sophia wasn't just a server. She was the nobody Sterling was talking about. She was the girl who studied until her eyes burned, who worked double shifts to pay for applications, only to have her future stolen by a man who treated it like a party favor for his spoiled daughter. This wasn't just a social slight anymore. This was grand larceny of a human life. I looked back at Sterling. He wasn't a father. He was a parasite. He fed on the dreams of people like Sophia to fatten up his own offspring. I set the champagne bottle down on a side table with a deliberate heavy thud. The sound was final. The discovery phase was over. I had the motive, I had the method, and I had the confession. I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands were steady. I opened a contact named Senator Reynolds. He was the keynote speaker currently in the green room, and my oldest friend from law school. I typed 2 sentences. Code blue in the kitchen. I need a witness. I hit send. I wasn't just the mother of the groom anymore. I was the judge. The kitchen doors swung open with a heavy thud, silencing the nearby conversation. Senator William Reynolds stood in the frame, flanked by 2 security detail agents. He was the keynote speaker, a man whose face was on every news channel in the country. Sterling Thorne's face lit up. He smoothed his tuxedo jacket, stepping forward with his hand extended, ready to claim connection to power. Senator and honor. Sterling Thorne, managing partner of... Reynolds walked right past him. He didn't even blink. He walked straight to the service station where I was standing holding a dirty rag. Lydia, Reynolds asked, his voice booming in the sudden quiet of the room. Judge Vance, why on earth are you wearing an apron? The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of vacuum that happens when a bomb detonates, but the sound hasn't caught up to the blast wave yet. Sterling's hand was still extended in the air, grasping at nothing. He looked at the senator, then at me, the cleaning lady, then back at the senator. His face went from flushed to an ashen gray in 3 seconds flat. Judge Madison whispered, her champagne glass tilting dangerously. I reached behind my back and untied the knot of the apron. I pulled the white fabric over my head, folded it neatly, slowly, and placed it on the tray next to the empty glasses. I smoothed the lapels of my navy suit. I wasn't just Sarah Martinez anymore. I was the Honorable Lydia Vance. Actually, Miss Thorne, I said, my voice projecting to the back of the room, without me raising it a decibel. I am the presiding judge on the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, the same court that is currently reviewing your father's $40 billion merger. Sterling made a choking sound. Judge Vance. We had no idea. Clearly, a misunderstanding. We were just joking about the... Joking, I cut him off. I stepped into his personal space. He shrank back. Was it a joke when you admitted to a conspiracy to violate the Clean Water Act? Was it a joke when you detailed your plan to bury the toxicity reports in box 4000 of the discovery files? The blood left his lips completely. That is... privileged conversation, he stammered. Not when you shouted at a waiter in a crowded room, Mr. Thorne, I said coldly. There is no attorney-client privilege in the catering line. You admitted to spoliation of evidence in front of a federal judge and a United States senator. I nodded at Reynolds, who crossed his arms and glared at Sterling. I can explain, Sterling wheezed. You will, I promised, at your disbarment hearing. I turned to Madison. She looked small now. The armor of her expensive dress had dissolved. She looked like exactly what she was, a child playing dress-up. And as for the Solicitor General's internship, I continued watching her flinch. I sit on that oversight committee. We take academic integrity very seriously. I'll be personally pulling your file tomorrow morning. I'm very interested to see how an application was misplaced to make room for you. Mother, do something. Madison grabbed her mother's arm, but her mother was staring at the floor, wishing she could dissolve into the carpet. Ethan, I said, turning to my son. He stepped out from the shadows. He didn't look scared anymore. He looked relieved. He looked at Madison, then at me. He walked over and stood by my side. Ready to go, Mom? He asked. One last thing. I turned back to Sterling, who was now trembling visibly. You were right about one thing, Mr. Thorne. You really should be careful who you talk to. You never know when the cleaning lady might hold the gavel. I turned on my heel and walked out. The silence held until the heavy doors swung shut behind us. I didn't stay for the cake. By the time the Harvard Club staff was serving dessert, I was already in a cab, my heels kicked off, drafting an affidavit on my phone. The fallout was swift. It wasn't a scandal, it was an implosion. 3 months later, the headlines were still running. Meridian merger blocked Thorne and Partners under federal investigation. Sterling Thorne didn't just lose the case, he lost the firm. When the Bar Association received the transcript of his kitchen confession corroborated by a U.S. senator, his license to practice law evaporated faster than the champagne he used to drink. But the real justice wasn't in the destruction of the old guard. It was in the reallocation of the assets. I sat in my chambers, the morning sun hitting the mahogany desk. Ethan sat across from me, looking lighter, younger than he had in years. He had ended things with Madison that night in the lobby. No drama, no shouting. Just a simple return of the ring. She called me yesterday, Ethan said, stirring his coffee. She's working at a boutique in Soho, part of her community service agreement. She said her feet hurt. I smiled, signing a document. Good. Pain is an excellent teacher. Maybe she'll finally learn that respect isn't an inheritance. And the internship? Ethan asked. I opened the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a fresh file. That was the easiest ruling I've ever made. The scene shifted in my mind to the previous week. I had tracked down Sophia, the server from the Gala. I found her in the library, buried under the same LSAT books. When I handed her the acceptance letter to the Solicitor General's program, the one Madison had tried to steal, she didn't scream. She didn't jump. She just cried, silent and shaking the way people do when they've been invisible for so long they forget what it feels like to be seen. She starts Monday, I told Ethan. She didn't need a favor, she just needed a fair trial. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. The skyline was filled with towers of glass and steel monuments to power and money. But down on the street, the real city was moving. The janitors, the servers, the bus drivers, the invisible army that keeps the world turning. I thought about the apron folded neatly in my closet at home, right next to my judicial robes. They were different uniforms, but they served the same master. Truth. Sterling Thorne thought power was about who you could command. He forgot that true power is about who you can protect. I turned back to my son, my gavel resting heavy and silent on the desk. Justice is blind, I said softly, but she isn't deaf, and she hears everything. If you believe that character is revealed when you think no one is watching, share this story. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Lydia's shoes?